My name is Leigh Jenco. I'm Associate Professor of Political Theory at the London School of Economics and Political Science. My book, Changing Referents, Learning Across Space and Time in China and the West, was published by Oxford University Press a few months ago, and I'm here to discuss it. So the book is focused on a series of debates stretching from the 1860s to the 1920s in China about what and how to learn from the West. Now, this was hugely important because unlike many other societies in the non-Western world, China was never actually colonized by Westerners. It was colonized by Japan, but it was never colonized by Westerners. And as a result, what you see in China is an somewhat unprecedented and unusually sophisticated, long-standing, and rich conversation about how Chinese should actually engage with European and American ideas, political institutions, science, and technology. So the book actually examines this debate, and it's a multivocal debate. People have lots of different opinions about how the West should exactly be engaged. But one of the running themes of this engagement is the idea that the kind of knowledge that Chinese thinkers were hoping to borrow from the West was recognized to exist in social institutions and in communities of knowledge and language. That is to say, knowledge wasn't simply something you read in a book and then could take back to China. Knowledge of something like democratic institutions, for example, egalitarianism, equality, gender equality in particular. These were all things that you actually had to practice with people. You couldn't simply understand them as being meaningful unless you actually understood them in community with others. And so this drove their perceptions of their borrowing of this knowledge. And I think this is a very, very distinct view from what we see in a lot of European and American political theory today when they're looking at cross-cultural learning. And so that was the main point of the book, was to kind of showcase these Chinese discussions, show them, of course, as historically significant, but also as having some real theoretical value in how we can think about cross-cultural understanding and borrowing ideas and institutions from other societies and cultures different from our own. I'd say the biggest contribution can only really be understood in comparison to the existing range of choices we have now in contemporary, largely English language, political and social theory. Now, most of that contemporary political and social theory holds that trying to understand other people who are situated in societies that are culturally different from your own can at best only proceed by way of a dialogue in which each side sort of comes to perhaps a slightly deeper understanding of where the other is coming from. But you don't actually learn something from each other in the way, for example, a graduate student might learn about liberalism or Marxism and become convinced by those arguments and converted to its way of thinking. And I think that this is fundamentally incorrect. And many of the discussions that I examine in the book actually show why that's so problematic. The fact is, you can learn from differently situated cultures, societies, and individuals. It just takes a bit more work. It's not simply a matter of having a dialogue, but it's also significantly about engaging with others in your society to transform the kinds of institutions and conversations and languages that you are using to talk about ideas in your time and place. It's relevant in a number of ways. Perhaps one of the most important ways is that as China becomes more powerful and more people in the European and American worlds are having encounters with people in China, Chinese businesses, Chinese students, Chinese diplomats, all of these encounters are accelerating at an increasing rate. And so I think it's really important in this conversation to actually understand some of what historically Chinese thinkers have thought about these encounters from their own perspective, not simply what we think of them, but how Chinese thinkers have thought of them. Another reason it's significant, in my view, is that it makes a contribution to something called comparative political theory, which is the attempt by European and American scholars to seriously engage non-Western thought in its own terms. Now, non-Western thought has historically been excluded, ironically, from a lot of the discussion about political and social theory that goes on in the academy. And I see this book very much as a corrective to that. It doesn't simply talk about the Chinese and their conversation about Western learning as a case study, but rather it engages the Chinese on their own terms. And I, in my examination of these discussions, also hope to learn from them. So I, too, am hoping to develop and innovate upon the kinds of tracks that they originally laid down in the 19th and 20th century.